Chapter 30. Pensive. The door of the office opened. "Hello, Porter," said Moody. "Come in then." Harry walked inside. He had been inside Dumbledore's office once before. It was a very beautiful circular room lined with pictures of previous headmasters and headmistresses of Hogwarts, all of whom were fast asleep, their chairs rising and falling gently. Cornelius Fudge was standing beside Dumbledore's desk, wearing his usual pin-striped cloak and holding his lime green bowler hat. "Harry," said Fudge jovially, moving forward. "How are you?" "Fine," Harry lied. "We were just talking about the night when Mr. Crouch turned up on the grounds," said Fudge. "It was you who found him, was it not?" "Yes," said Harry. Then, feeling it was pointless to pretend that he hadn't overheard what they had been saying, he added, "I didn't see Madame Maxim anywhere, though. And she had have a job hiding, wouldn't she?" Dumbledore smiled at Harry behind Fudge's back, his eyes twinkling. "Yes, well," said Fudge, looking embarrassed. "We are about to go for a short walk on the ground, Harry, if you'll excuse us. Perhaps if you just go back to your class. I wanted to talk to you, Professor," Harry said quickly, looking at Dumbledore, who gave him a swift, searching look. "Wait here for me, Harry," he said. "Our examination of the ground will not take long." He trooped out in silence past him in and closed the door. After a minute or so, Harry heard a cluck of Moody's wooden leg growling faint in the corridor below. He looked around. "Hello, Fox," he said. Fox, Professor Dumbledore's Phoenix, was standing on his golden perch beside the door, the size of a swan and magnificent scarlet and gold plumage. He switched his long tail and blinked wailingly at Harry. Harry sat down in a chair in front of Dumbledore's desk. For several minutes he sat and watched the old headmaster and headmistresses snoozing in their frames, thinking about what he had just heard, and running his finger over his scar. It had stopped hurting now. He felt much calmer somehow now that he was in Dumbledore's office, knowing he would shortly be telling him about the dream. Harry looked up at the walls behind the desk. The patched and ragged sorting hat was standing on a shelf. A glass case next to it held a magnificent silver sword, large rubies set into the hilt, which Harry recognized as the one he himself had pulled out of the sorting hat in the second year. The sword had once belonged to Godric Gryffindor, founder of Harry's house. He was gazing at it, remembering how it had come to his aid when he had thought all hope was lost. He noticed a patch of silver light dancing and shimmering on the glass case. He looked around for a source of the light and saw silver white shining brightly from within a black cabinet behind him. Closed door had not been closed properly. Harry hesitated, glanced at Fox, then got up, walked across the office and open the cabinet door. A shallow stone basin lay there, odd carving around the edge, run and symbols that Harry did not recognize. The silvery light was coming from the basin's content, which were like nothing Harry had ever seen before. He could not tell whether the substance was liquid or a gas. It was a bright, whitish silver, and it was moving carelessly, the surface of it being rippled like water beneath wine, and then like clouds separated and swirled smoothly. It looked like light made liquid, unlike wind made solid. Harry couldn't make up his mind. He wanted to touch it to find out what he felt like, but nearly 4 years' experience of the magical world told him that sketching his hand into a bowl full of some unknown substance was a very stupid thing to do. He therefore pulled his wand out of the side of the rope, cast a nervous look around the office, looking back at the content of the basin, and probed them. The surface of the silvery stuff inside the basin began to swish every fast. Harry bent closer, his head right inside the cabinet. The silvery substance had become transparent. It looked like glass. He looked down into it, expecting to see the stone bottom of the basin, and saw instead an enormous room below the surface of the mysterious substance. A room into which he seemed to be looking through a circular window in the ceiling. The room was dimly lit. He thought it might even be underground, for there were no windows, merely torches brackets such as the one that illuminated the walls of Hogwarts, lowering his face so that his nose was a mere inch away from the glassy substance. Harry saw that rows and rows of witches and wizards were seated around every wall on what seemed to be bench rising in level. An empty chair stood in the very center of the room. There was something about the chair that gave Harry an ominous feeling. Chin encircled the arms of it, and though its occupant were usually tied to it, where was this place? It surely wasn't Hogwarts. He had never seen a room like that here in the castle. Moreover, the crowd in the mysterious room at the bottom of the basin was comprised of adults, and Harry knew there were not nearly that many teachers at Hogwarts. They seemed, he thought, to be waiting for something, even thought he could see only the tops of their hats. All of their faces seemed to be pointing in one direction, and none of them were talking to one another. The basin being circular and the room he was observing square, Harry could not make out what was going on in the corners of it. He leaned ever closer, tickling his head, trying to see. The tip of his nose touched the strange substance into which he was staring. Dumbledore's office gave an aluminium lurch. Harry was thrown forward and pitched head first into the substance inside the basin. But his head did not hit the stone bottom. He was falling through something icy cold and black. It was like being snagged into a dark whirlpool. And suddenly, Harry found himself sitting on a bench at the end of the room inside the basin. A bench raised high above others. He looked up at the high stone ceiling, expecting to see the circular window through which he had just been staring. But there was nothing there but dark solid stone. Beneath, hard and fast, Harry looked around him. Not one of the witches and wizards in the room, and there were at least 200 of them, was looking at him. Not one of them seemed to have noticed that a 14-year boy had just dropped out the ceiling into their midst. Harry turned to the wizard next to him on the bench and uttered a loud cry of surprise that reverberated around the silent room. He was sitting right next to Albus Dumbledore. Professor, Harry said in a kind and strangled whisper, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I was just looking at the basin in your cabinet. Where are we? But Dumbledore didn't move or speak. He ignored Harry completely, like every other wizard on the benches. He was staring into the far corner of the room where there was a door. Harry gazed, nonplussed, at Dumbledore, then around at the silent, watchful crowd, then back to Dumbledore. And then it dawned on him. Once before, Harry had found himself somewhere that nobody could see or hear him. That time he had fallen through a page into an enchanted diary, right onto somebody else's memory. And unless he was very much mistaken, something of the sort had happened again. Harry raised his right hand, hesitated, and then waved it energetically in front of Dumbledore's face. Dumbledore did not blink, look around at Harry, or indeed move at all. And that, in Harry's opinion, settled the matter. Dumbledore wouldn't ignore him like that. He was inside a memory, and he was not the present day Dumbledore. Yet, it couldn't be that long ago. The Dumbledore sitting next to him now was silver haired, just like the present day Dumbledore. But what was this place? What were all the wizards waiting for? Harry looked around more carefully. The room, as he had suspected when observing it from above, was almost certainly underground. More of a dagon than a room, he thought. There was a blink for forbidden air about the place. There were no pictures on the walls, no decoration at all, just this serene row of benches rising in level all around the room, all pointions, so that they had a clear view on that chair with the chain on its arm before Harry could reach any conclusion about the place in which they were. He heard footsteps, door in the corner of the doggone opened, and three people entered, at least one man flanked by two dementors. Harry inside went cold. The Dementor, tall, hooded creature whose face were concealed, were climbing slowly toward the chair in the corner center of the room, is grasping one of the man's arm with their dead and rotten looking hand. The man between them looked as though he was about to faint, and Harry couldn't blame him. He knew the Dementor could not touch him inside a memory, but he remembered their power only too well. The watching crowd recalled slightly as the Dumbledore placed the man in the chair and glittered back out of the room. The door swung shut behind them. Harry looked down at the man now sitting in the chair and saw that it was Karkaroff. Unlike Dumbledore, Karkaroff looked much younger. His hair and goatee were black. He was not dressed in sleek fur, but in thin and drag robes. He was shaking even as Harry watched. The chair on the arm of the chair glowed suddenly gold and shook their way up Karkaroff's arm, binding him there. Igor Karkaroff said a curt voice to Harry's left. Harry looked around and saw Mr. Crouch standing up in the middle of the bench beside him. Crouch's hair was dark, his face was much less lined. He looked fit and alert. You have been brought from Azkaban to present evidence to the Ministry of Magic. You have given us to understand that you haven't important information for us. Parcroft straightened himself as best he could, tightening bound to the chair. I have, sir, he said, and although his voice was very scared, Harry could still hear the familiar uncut note. I wish to be of use to ministry. I wish to help. I know that the ministry is trying to round up the last of the Dark Lord's supporters. I am eager to assist in any way I can. There was a murmur around the benches. Some of the wizards and witches were surviving Karkaroff with interest, others with pronounced mistrust. Then Harry heard quite distantly from Dumbledore's other side a familiar growling voice, Flit. Harry leaned forward so that he could see past Dumbledore. Mad-Eye Moody was sitting there, except that there was a very noticeable difference in his appearance. He did not have his magical eye, but two normal ones. Both were looking down upon Karkaroff, and both were narrowed in intense dislike. Crouch is going to let him out, Moody breathed quietly to Dumbledore. He has done a deal with him. Took me 6 months to track him down, and Crouch is going to let him go if he has got enough new names. Let's hear his information, I say, and throw him straight back to the Dementors. Dumbledore made a small noise of distance through his long croak noise. Oh, I was forgetting, you don't like the Dementors, do you, Albus? Said Moody with a sardonic smile. No, said Dumbledore calmly. I'm afraid I don't. I have long felt the ministry is bound to ally itself with such creatures. For fleet like this, Moody said softly. You say you have names for us, Karkrov, said Mr. Crouch. Let us hear them, please. You must understand, said Karkrov hurriedly, that who must not have been named appropriately, always in a greater secrecy. Prefer that we, I mean to say his supporters, and I regret now very deeply that I ever counted myself among them. Get on with it, sneered Moody. We never knew the names of everyone, one of our fellows. He alone knew exactly who we all were. It was a wise move, wasn't it? As it prevents someone like you, Karkrow, from turning all of them in muttered Moody. Yet you say you have some names for us, said Crouch. I do, said Karkrow breathlessly, and these were important supporters. That you people, I saw you with my own eyes doing his binding. I give you this information as a sign that I fully and totally renounce him, and I am filled with a remorse so deeply I can barely. These names are, said Mr. Crouch sharply. Cartwright drew a deep breath. There was Anton Dolwo. He said, I saw him torture countless Mughal and non-supporter of the Dark Lord and help him to do it. Murmured Moody. We have already apprehended Dovalo, said Crouch. He was caught shortly after yourself. Indeed, said Crarcroft, his eyes widening. I am delighted to hear it, but he didn't look it. Harry could tell that it news had come as a real blow off to him. One of his name was worthless. Any other, said Crouch coldly. Yeah, yes. There was Rosier, said Carcroft hurriedly. Even Rosier. Rosier is dead, said Crouch. He was caught shortly after you were too. He preferred to fight rather than come quietly and was killed in a struggle. Took a bit of me with him, though whispered Moody to Harry's side. Harry looked around at him once more and saw him indicating a large chunk out of his nose to Dumbledore. No, no, more than Rosier deserved, said Karkaroff, a real note of panic in his voice now. Harry could see that was starting to worry that none of his information would be of any use of ministry. Karkaroff's eyes darted toward the door in the corner behind which the Dementor undoubtedly still stood waiting. Any more? Said Crouch. Yes, said Karkaroff. There was a traveler. He helped me murder the McKinnos Mulciber. He specialized in the Empiricious curse, forced countless people to do horrific things. Rookwood, who was a spy and passed, he who must not be named, useful information from inside the ministry itself. Harry could tell that this name Karkaroff had struck gold. The watching crowd was murmuring together. Rookwood, said Mr. Crouch, nodding to Wiz sitting in front of him, who began scribbling upon her piece of parchment. Augustus Rookwood of the Department of Ministry, the very same, said Karkaroff eagerly. I believe he used a network of well-placed wizards both inside the ministry and out to collect information. But travelers and Molsiber were how, said Mr. Crouch. Very well, Karkaroff. If that is all, you will be turned to Azkaban while we decide. Not yet, cried Karkaroff, looking quite desperate. Wait, I have more. Harry could see him sweating in the torchlight, his white skin contrasting strongly with the black of his hair and beard shape. He shouted, Severus Snape. Snape has been cleared by his council, said Crouch disdainfully. He was being vouched for by Albus Dumbledore. No, shouted Karkaroff, straining at the chain that bound him to the chair. I assure you, Severus Snape is a Death Eater. Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. I have given evidence already on this matter, he said calmly. Severus Snape was indeed a Death Eater. However, he rejoined our side before Lord Voldemort's downfall has turned spy for us. At great personal risk, he is now no more Death Eater than I am. Harry turned a look at Mad-Eye Moody. He was wearing a look of deep skepticism behind Dumbledore's back. Very well, Karkaroff, Crouch said coldly. You have been as assistant. I shall review your case. You will return to Azkaban in the meantime. Mr. Crouch's voice faded. Harry looked around. The dragon was dissolving. as though it were made of smoke. Everything was fading. He could see only his own body. All else was swirling darkness. And then the dragon returned. Harry was sitting in different seats, still on the highest bench, but now to the left side, Mr. Crouch. The atmosphere seemed too quite different, relaxed, even cheerful. The witches and wizards all around the wall were talking to one another almost as though they were at some sort of sporting event. Harry noticed a witch halfway up the rows of benches opposite. She had short blonde hair and wearing magenta robes and was sucking the end of the acid green quill. It was unmistakably a younger Rita Skeeter. Harry looked around. Dumbledore was sitting beside him, again wearing different robe. Mr. Crouch looked more tired and somehow Files grunted. Harry understood it was different memory, a different day, a different trial. The door in the corner opened and Ludo Bagman walked into the room. This was not, however, a Ludo Bagman gone to seed, but a Ludo Bagman who was clearly at the height of his quick playing fitness. His nose wasn't broken now, he was tall and lean and muscular. Bugman looked nervous as he sat down in the second chair. It did not bind him there as it had bound Karkaroff of Bigman, perhaps taking heart from his glance around the watching crowd, waved at couple of times and managed a small smile. Ludo Bigman, you have been brought here in front of the Council Magical Law to answer charges relating to the activities of Death Eaters, said Mr. Crouch. We have heard the evidence against you and are about to reach our verdict. Do you have anything to add to your testimony before we pronounce judgment? Harry couldn't believe his ear. Ludo Bagman, a Death Eater, only said Bagman, smiling awkwardly. Well, I know I have been a bit of idiot. One or two wizards and witches in the surrounding seats smiled indulgently. Mr. Krause did not appear to share their feeling. He was staring down at Ludovignon with an expression of the utmost severity and dislike. You never spoke a true word, boy, someone muttered dryly to Dumbledore behind Harry. He looked around and saw Moody sitting there again. If I didn't know he had always been dim, I had said some of those bulger had permanently affected his brain. Ludovic Bigman, you were caught passing information to Lord Voldemort's supporter, said Mr. Crouch. For this, I suggest a term of imprisonment in Azkaban, listening no less than. But there was an energy ouch from the surrounding bench. Several of the witches and wizards around the wall stood up, shaking their heads, and even the first at Mr. Crouch. But I have told you I had no idea, Bagman called earnestly over the crowd babble, his round blue eye widening. None at all. Old Rookwood was friend of my dad's. Never crossed my mind he was in with you know who. I thought I was collecting information for our side, and Rookwood kept talking about getting me a job in ministry later on. Once my quits day are over, I can't keep getting hit by Bulger for the rest of life, can I? There were titters from the crowd. It will be put to the vote, said Mr. Crouch coldly. He turned to the right hand side of the Dagon. The jury will please raise their hand, those in favor of imprisonment. Harry looked toward the right-hand side of the digon. Not one person raised their hand. Many of the witches and wizards around the walls began to clap. One of the witches on the jury stood up. Yes, Buck Crouch. We had just like to congratulate Mr. Bagman on his splendid performance for England in the Quidditch match against Turkey last Saturday, the witch said breathlessly. Mr. Crouch looked furious. The Dagon was rising with applause now. Bagman got to his feet and bowed, beaming depictedly. Mr. Crouch spat at Dumbledore, sitting down as Bagman walked out of the Dagon. Rook would get him a job indeed. The day Ludo Bagman joins us will be sad, the day indeed for the ministry. And the Dagon dissolved again when it had returned, Harry looked around. He and Dumbledore were still sitting beside Mr. Crouch, but the atmosphere could not have been more different. There was total silence, broken only by the dry sob of a frail, wimpy looking witch sat next to Mr. Crouch. She was clutching a handkerchief to her mouth with trembling hand. Harry looked up at Crouch and saw that he looked wearer and grayer than ever before. A nerve was twitching in his temple, bringing them inside, and a voice echoed through the silent Dagon. The door in the corner opened yet again. Six Dementors entered, this time flanking a group of four people. Harry saw people in the crowd turn to look up at Mr. Crouch. A few of them whispered to one another. The Dementors placed each of the four people in the fourth chair with chained arm and now stood on the Dagon floor. There was a thickest man who stared blackly up at Crouch, a thinner and more nervous looking man who eyed were dating around the crowd, a woman and thick shining dark hair and heavily hooded eyes, who was sitting in the chair as though it were a throne, and a boy in his late teens who looked nothing short of petrified. He was shivering, his stew-colored hair all over his face, his freckled skin milk white. The wispy little witch beside Crouch began to rock backward and forward in her seat, whimpering into the handkerchief. Crouch stood up. He looked down upon the four in front of him, and there was pure hatred in his face. You have been brought here before the Council of Magical Law, he said clearly, so that we may pass judgment on you for a crime so heinous. Father, said the boy with the stew-colored hair, Father, please, that we have really heard the like of it within the court, said Crouch, speaking more loudly, drawing out his son's voice. We have heard the evidence against you. The four of you stand accused of capturing an Aurora, Frank Longbottom, and subjecting him to the Cruciatus curse, believing him to have knowledge of the present whereabouts of your excel master. He must not named. Father, I didn't stricken the boy in chair below. I didn't, I swear it. Father, don't send me back to the Dementors. You are further accused, bellowed Mr. Crouch, of using the Cruciatus curse on Frank Longbottom's voice when he would not give you information. You plan to restore he who must not be named to power and to resume the lives of violence you personally lead while he was strong. I now ask the jury, Mother, screamed the boy below, and the white little witch beside Crouch began to sob, rocking backward and forward. Mother, stop him. Mother, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. I now ask the jury, shouted Mr. Crouch, to raise their hand if they believe, as I do, that this crime deserves a life sentence in Azkaban. In unison, the witches and wizard along the right-hand side of the Dagon raised their hands. The crowd around the wall began to clap as it had for Big Man, their face full of savage triumph. The boy began to scream, No, mother, mother, no, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't know, don't send me there, don't let me hear him. The Dementors were gringling back into the room. The boy three champions rose quietly from their seat. The woman with the heavy lidded eyes looked up at the Crouch and called, The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch. Throw us into his cabin. We will wait. He will rise again and will come for us. He will reward us beyond any of his other supporters. We alone were faithful, we alone tried to find him, but the boy was trying to fight off the Dementors, even though Harry could see their cold, draining power stirring to affect him. The crowd was jeering, some of them on their feet, as the women swept out of the Dagon, and the boy continued to struggle. I'm your son, he screamed up at Crouch. I'm your son, you are no son of mine, bellowed Crouch, Mr. Crouch, his eyes bulging suddenly. I have no son. The wispy witch beside him gave a great gasp of slump in her seat. She had fainted. Crouch appeared not to have noticed. Take them away, Crouch roared at the Dementor, split flying from his mouth. Take them away, and may they not dare. Father, father, I wasn't involved. No, father, please. I think, Harry, it's time to return to my office, said a quiet voice in Harry's ear. Harry stared. He looked around, then he looked on his other side. There was Albus Dumbledore sitting on the right, watching Crouch's son being dragged away by Dementors, and there was an Albus Dumbledore on his left, looking right at him. Come, said Dumbledore on his left, and he put his hand under Harry's elbow. Harry felt himself rising into the air and began to dissolve around him. For a moment, all was blackness, and then he felt as though he had done a slow motion somersault, suddenly landing flat on his feet in what seemed like dazing light of Dumbledore's sunlight officer. The stone basin was simmering in the cabinet in front of him, and Albus Dumbledore was standing beside him. Professor, Harry gasped. I know I shouldn't have. I didn't mean the cabinet door was sort of open. I quite understand, said Dumbledore. He lifted the basin, cried it over the desk, placed it upon the polished top, and sat down in the chair behind it. He motioned for Harry to sit down opposite him. Harry did so, staring at the stone basin. The content had returned to his original silvery white state, swirling and dripping beneath his gaze. What is it? Harry asked shakily. This is called Pensive, said Dumbledore. I sometimes find, and I am sure you know the feeling that I simply have too many thoughts and memories crammed into my mind. No, said Harry. You who prudent truthful says that he had ever felt anything of sort. At this time, said Dumbledore, indicating the stone basin, I use the pensive. One simple sip on the excess thought from one's mind, pour them into the basin and examine them at one's leisure. It becomes easier to spot pattern and links to understand when they are. Dumbledore drew his wand out of his inside of his robe and placed the tip into his own silvery hair. Here is temple. Then he took a wand away. Here seemed to be changing it, but when Harry saw that it was in fact a glittering strand of the same strange silvery white substance that filled the pensive, Dumbledore added the fresh thought to the basin, and Harry, astonished, saw his own face swimming around the surface of the bowl. Dumbledore placed his strong hand on either side of the pensive and swirled it, rather as a gold prospector would pan for fragments of gold, and Harry saw his own face change smoothly into shapes. Who opened his mouth and spoke to the ceiling, his voice echoing slightly. It's coming back. Karkaroff is too stronger and clearer than ever. A connection I couldn't have made without assistance, Dumbledore sighed, but never mind. He peered over the top of the half moon spectacle at Harry, who was gasping at Snape's face, which was continued to swirl around the bowl. I was using the pencil when Mr. Fudge arrived for our meeting and put it away rather hastily, undoubtedly. I did not fasten the cabinet door properly. Naturally, it would have attracted your attention. I'm sorry, Harry murmured. Dumbledore shook his head. Curiosity is not a sin, he said, but we would exercise caution with your curiosity. Yes, indeed. Frowning slightly, he probed the thought within the basin within the tip of his wand. Instantly, a figure rose out of it, a plump, strolling girl of about 16 who began to revolve slowly with her feet still in the basin. She took no notice whatever of Harry, of Professor Dumbledore. When she spoke, her voice echoed as Snape's had done, as though it were coming from the depth of the stone basin. He put a hex on me, Professor Dumbledore, and I was only teasing him, sir. I only said I had seen him kissing Florence behind the greenhouse last Thursday. But why, Bertha, said Dumbledore sadly, looking up at the now silently revolved girl, why did you have to follow him in the first place? Bertha, Harry whispered, looking up at her, is that was the Bertha Jorgensen. Yes, said Dumbledore, prodding a thought in the basin. Bertha sank back into them and they became silvery and opaque once more. That was Bertha as I remember her at school. The silvery light from the pencil illuminating Dumbledore's face, and it struck Harry suddenly how very old he was looking. He knew, of course, that Dumbledore was getting on in years, but somehow he never really thought a Dumbledore as the old man. So, Harry, said Dumbledore quietly, before you get lost in thoughts, you wanted to tell me something. Yes, said Harry, Professor. I was in aviation just now and I fell asleep. He hesitated there, wondering if I reprimed was coming, but Dumbledore merely said, quite understandable, continuously, well, I had a dream, said Harry, a dream about Lord Voldemort. He was torturing Wormtail. You know who? Wormtail, I do know, said Dumbledore promptly. Please continue. Voldemort got a letter from an owl. He said something like Voldemort's blunder had been repaired. He said someone was dead. Then he said Wormtail couldn't be led to the snake. There was a snake beside his chair. He said he had feeling me too indeed. Then he did a Cruciatus curse on Wormtail and my scar hurt. Harry said it woke me up. It hurt badly. Dumbledore merely looked at him. That's all, said Harry. I see, said Dumbledore quietly. I see now. Has your scar hurt at any other time this year, expecting the time it woke you up over the summer? No, I. How did you know it woke me over the summer? Said Harry, astonished. You are not Cyrus' only correspondent, said Dumbledore. I have also been in contact with him ever since he left Hogwarts last year. It was I who suggested the Mountside Cave as the safest place for him to stay. Dumbledore got up and began walking up the town beside his desk. Every now and then he placed his wand tip to his temple, removed another shining silver thought, and adding it to pencil. The thought inside began to swell so fast that Harry couldn't make out anything clear. It was merely a blur of color. Professor, he said quietly. After a couple of minutes, Dumbledore stopped pacing and looked at Harry. My apologies, he said quietly. He sat back down at his desk. Do you know why my scar hurting me? Dumbledore looked very intently at Harry for a moment and then said, I have a theory. No more than that. Believe that your scar hurt both when Lord Voldemort is nearer you and when he is feeling a particularly strong surge of hatred. Why? Because you and he are connected by the curse that failed, said Dumbledore. That is no ordinary scar. So you think that's dream didn't it really happen? It is possible, said Dumbledore. I would say probably. Harry, did you see Voldemort? No, said Harry. Just the back of his chair, but there wouldn't have been anything to see. Would there? I mean, he hasn't got body, has he? But when? How could he wield the wand? Harry said slowly. How indeed, muttered Dumbledore. How indeed. Neither Dumbledore nor Harry spoke for a while, Dumbledore gazing across the room and every now and then placing his wand tip to his temple and adding another silver thought to his sitting mass within pencil. Professor, Harry said last, do you think he is getting stronger? Voldemort, said Dumbledore, looking at Harry over pensive. It was the characteristic, piercing look Dumbledore had given him on other occasions and always made Harry feel as though Dumbledore were seeing right thought him in the way that even moody magical eye could not. Once again, Harry, I can only give you my suspicion. Dumbledore sighed again, and he looked older and wearier than ever. The year of Voldemort's ascent to power, he said, were marked with disappearance. Bertha Jorkins was vanished without a trace. In the place where Voldemort was certainly known to be last, Mr. Krauss too had disappeared within the very ground, and there was a third disappearance on which the ministry, I regret to say, do not contain of any importance. for it concerned a Mughal. His name was Frank Bercy. He lived in the village where Voldemort's father grew up, and he was not been since last August. You see, I read the Mughal newspaper. Unlike most of my ministry friends, Dumbledore looked very serious at Harry. This disappearance seemed to me to be linked. The ministry disagree, as you may have heard while waiting outside my office. Harry nodded. Silence fell between them. Dumbledore extracting thought. Every now and then, Harry felt as though he ought to go, but his curiosity held him in check. Officer, he said again. Yes, Harry, said Dumbledore. Will I ask you about that court thing I was in the pensive? You could, said Dumbledore heavily. I attend it myself times, but some trial come back to me more clearly than other, particularly now. You know that trial you found me in, that one is Crouch's son. Well, were they talking about Neville's parents? Dumbledore gave Harry a very sharp look. Has Neville never told you why he has been brought up by his grandmother? He said. Harry shook his head, wondering as he did so how he could have failed to ask Neville this in almost 4 years of knowing him. Yes, they were talking about Neville's parents, said Dumbledore. His father, Frank, was an orator, just like Professor Moody. He and his wife were tortured for information about Voldemort's whereabouts after he lost his power, as you heard. So they are dead, said Harry quietly. No, said Dumbledore, his voice full of bitterness. Harry had never heard there before. They are insane. They are both in St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries. I believe Neville visited them with his grandmother during holidays. They do not recognize him. Harry sat there, horror struck. He have never known, never in 4 years bothered to find out. The Longbottom were very popular, said Dumbledore. The attack on them came after Voldemort's fall from power, just when everyone thought they were safe. Those attacks caused a wave of fury such as I have never known. Ministry was under great pressure to catch those who had done it. Unfortunately, the Longbottom's evidence was, given their condition, none reliable. Then Mr. Crouch's son might not have been involved, said Harry slowly. Dumbledore shook his head. As to that, I have no idea. Harry sat in silence once more, watching the content of the permissive will. There were two more questions he was burning to ask, but they concerned the guilty of living people. He said, Mr. Bagman has never been accused for any dark activity since, said Dumbledore calmly. Right, said Harry hastily, staring at the content of the pensive again, which were spilling more slowly than that Dumbledore had stopped adding thoughts. And but pensive seemed to be asking his questions for him. Snape's face was swirling on the surface again. Dumbledore glanced down into and then up at Harry. No more has Professor Snape, he said. Harry looked into Dumbledore's bright blue eyes and then he think well he wanted to know spill out of his mouth before he could stop it. What made you think he had really stopped supporting Voldemort, Professor? Dumbledore held Harry gaze for a few seconds and then said, That's Harry is a matter between Professor Snape and myself. Harry knew that the interview was over. Dumbledore did not look angry, yet there was finally in his tone that Harry, it was time to go. He stood up and so did Dumbledore. Harry, he said as Harry reached the door, please do not speak about Neville's parent to anybody else. He has the right to let people know when he is ready. Yes, Professor, said Harry, turning to go. And Harry looked back. Dumbledore was standing over the pensive, his face lit from beneath by a silver spot in right, looking older than ever. He stared at Harry for a moment and then he said, Good luck with the third task. That's it for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next chapter. Till then, see ya. Bye bye.